FNO preference.
Okay, so starting with the Prime Minister, actually, well, sorry, the OG, can I get who's speaking first and then their preferences? That's okay.
Nurlan is first, Samantha is second, and general pronouns is he.
OO?
Yeah, I'm FA, speaking both he or they, please.
CG?
Roman speaking first, Nikolai speaking second, no preference.
Sorry, give me 1 minute, just, okay. Sorry, I've just gotten a message from one of the CAs. Sorry, I think there might be a mix-up.
Yeah, so when we thought you were missing, we had to replace you, but apparently there was some miscommunication here.
Yeah, I mean, it's just messaging me now about it.
I think we should start regardless because we're already behind the schedule, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sorry, I just want to get confirmation from Emily just because she's. Okay, yeah, sorry. So I just got a message. Yeah, Emily says it's fine. If that's okay, that I'm gonna share this. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Starting again. Can I get CG and the who's speaking first in preferences?
Roman speaking first, Nikolai speaking second. This is my account, and we have no preferences.
Perfect. And then my CO team.
Yeah. Sorry, we're CO. I will be speaking first, and my partner will be speaking secondly. We have no gender preferences.
Perfect. Okay. Right. Does anybody have any questions before we start? No? Okay, well, in that case, can I get the Prime Minister to open the case that stands in their name?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Panel. Currently, science is weaponized to project the global dominance of the Chinese Communist Party. And we believe we should seize that. And for this one simple reason, the way this technology is used or abused the millions of life, and we believe this is very bad. So that's the main constructive that we're going to run. But before that, just to clarify our model, we believe that in the status quo, we stop any kind of research funding to professors, to departments, or to the universities at large, from Chinese government, the money from Chinese government or from Chinese private companies as well, and they cannot access and use that kind of research funding because it is going to be illegal. So we believe this is a sufficient model, and that's how we oversee. We will oversee that as any kind of contracts that we oversee in the status quo. We already ask for the sources of money, and therefore we don't think that's going to be a problematic as well. So there are two points of characterizations that I want to make. First of all, the way that what are the universities that we're talking about? We're talking about the most rich universities, the most powerful universities who have the best professors and the students around the world, because everyone wants to apply there. We're talking about university that has a large infrastructure specifically created for like research. We're talking about MIT, Harvard, like any kind of universities that can be used in order to actually boost that situation. We do have access to academia at large, to the network and scientific community that also makes that kind of science production here a very efficient, and this is literally where almost all the great stuff in the world is created. And secondly, second point of characterization, we say that it is used for like the professors from there in the status quo, professor departments or professors or departments. Actually, the realistic case is that they cooperate with certain Chinese private company, and therefore, as a part of the cooperation, usually the Chinese part claims patents as a part of that contracts. Therefore, they can legitimately take that after giving the money for research. And note the fact that Chinese companies actually support only certain areas of research because that's the most beneficial stuff for them. So how China uses that technology? I think there are three ways. First of all, this is the largely a surveillance technology. When you use 3D recognition or mapping in order to recognize and trace individuals everywhere. This is happening like literally in Xinjiang, when Uyghurs are living under the police state and cannot actually escape. There is a large police security network that non-citizen can avoid. Literally, they even do not feel safe in their homes because they are afraid of that the big brother is watching. This is also true in countries like Taiwan and Hong Kong, where the Chinese Communist Party is using that technology in order to suppress dissent. Therefore, people cannot get freedom, and they easily any attempt to get that freedom is also oppressed. This is the exclusive technology that is produced in the best universities in the world. And note the fact that it is not like a direct technology. You can you can use 3D recognition for anything, but China uses that in order to suppress dissent. The second thing that how China uses the technology is like it's technology like 5G. When you invest in that and try to gain economic advantage and leverage in most of the parts of the world, because this allows you to build a lot of infrastructure that is going to speed up the economy for that country. For example, higher internet bandwidth, or also like it also allows new technology like autonomous vehicles to be run, which is also kind of economically beneficial, and it has a lot of economic potential. This is also something that is developed and used by China. Thirdly, it is the military technology. When you use that radio location, any kind of stuff in order to build, or engineering in order to build a stronger navy, or in order to use satellite technology to get more intelligence, more quality of that, and in order to track individuals as well. So this has also military application. We do recognize that it is not as straightforward as that, but the parts of the technology can actually be built into the larger picture where it creates a military technology, because scientists at Harvard might think that they're just producing 3D technology, but the way it ends up being used is very damageful for a lot of individuals. So what happens on the alternative? There are two things. Number one, that China can invest that money now elsewhere. So this is good for two reasons. Firstly, this is less harmful because they cannot access the best, the infrastructure I characterized in the beginning of my speech, and therefore that means we would the world at large is going to be one step ahead of China every time because of that. Secondly, if they invest that money in the research funding to other places, that means science is going to develop elsewhere, we believe, which is also good, and it can also have kind of a collateral benefit on our side of the house as well. But before I go on, I would like to say POI from closing. Closing? Open.
Yes, we actually have a question. We don't understand how funding necessarily would mean that Chinese would get some technology from US or stuff like that. We said that funding basically means that they are granting their goodwill and like they want to collaborate.
There is no such thing as goodwill. You create a contract with, as a part of the contract, you get access to the technology that is produced. So it is not free. You just don't get money for free. Second thing that happens on the alternative on our side of the house is that quality of research is not going to change for three big reasons. First of all, as I have already said, China invests in only certain areas, so it does not affect the scientific community at large. But second of all, note the fact that the vast majority of the universities, the most qualified universities that have very large endowments, Harvard, MIT, Chicago, everything, they have billions of money, and only small amount of money in the status quo is used for research and funding. Therefore, they can just use that additional money as well. But certainly, they also do have access to a lot of American and Western companies that can use that private companies in order to do that and fund that research. Because currently, these companies cannot compete with Chinese alternatives because China offers more money, and therefore these companies lose that contracts. Now they can access that. Therefore, science in the United States does not change, and it still is going to be very good and high quality. For that reasons, very proud to propose. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for an excellent speech. I now call upon the Leader of the Opposition.
Am I audible?
Yep.
I'm starting. I'm going to argue that the science advances cumulatively, and universities should be autonomous, and China cannot dominate the market as much as OG claims. But first, some rebuttals. Firstly, they characterize the universities as the best and richest universities in the world. Not all universities are MIT, Harvard in USA. There are a lot of universities who are not as rich, who have insufficient funding, who needs funding, and we also need to talk about, and especially talk about this group of universities. Since Harvard and MIT have lots of money and they have little interest to feel the effect of China on themselves, they are less likely to get funding from China. Secondly, they say that China supports only certain areas of research. That's not true. All areas are not directly about politics, are not directly about security concerns, agriculture, medicine. These are all different fields of research which China can benefit, but also other societies can benefit. Thirdly, they talk about, for example, Uyghurs. This is not relevant to our debate because China already has that technology. I don't understand the marginal difference this policy will make. China already has the military powers to make discrimination against Uyghurs, to have control over Taiwan. I don't understand any marginal difference and how this is relevant to our debate. Fourthly, they say that China will build infrastructure and autonomous vehicles. So what's the harm? 5G means faster internet connection in UK. Autonomous cars means more security in the traffic for Western people, for Middle Eastern people, for all of us. We believe that everyone is going to benefit from that. And thirdly, they say that American companies does not have as much money as Chinese companies, therefore they cannot compete with China. That's fine, exactly. That's what we talk about. Since China offers more money for funding, universities and academicians have more possibilities, more resources to work on. Therefore, they will make more beneficial researches on the scientific field. Let's talk about our arguments, and then we will continue. Academicians and researchers should have an interest in the research topic prior to funding. These things takes a lot of effort and time. Therefore, we cannot believe that China cannot manipulate the results altogether. Academicians, universities have some reputations. They earn their living that way. And if the scientific community realizes that there is a fraud, this will be a huge problem. So even if they take this, the scientific community will probably notice there is fraud, especially because they will be more careful with studies funded by China. And we believe that universities and science advances cumulatively, therefore should be autonomous, and it's not legitimate to forbid their fundings. Why is this the case? If we only look at today's political concerns, this cumulative advancement is not going to be possible. Today, a research field that looks beneficial to China may benefit lots of societies in the future. Autonomous vehicles is a perfect example. Thanks to autonomous vehicles, we may experience thousands of less deaths in traffic, and I believe this is a huge potential. And another, the second way that science advances cumulatively, researchers will make use of the results to go on and improve his own research question. For example, there will be a common agricultural medicine about medicine or sociological problem in China. China will fund a research on these topics, and that agricultural result will be published in scientific, for example, magazines, since the professors who make researches in United States universities want to improve this, want to publish their studies, and another scientist, another academician will read those researches, will read those results, and will use those results in his own, in her own potential researches. That's how science improves collectively. And secondly, we believe that this is going to be harmful to both universities and students, because less funding means, for example, for United States or universities, less ranking in world numbers, because more researches mean having more research is a criteria, and we believe that that's how United States universities will be able to better compete in the with other universities, and this means less opportunities for students. For example, they will not be able to, for example, use some laboratories or make some surveys or go abroad to study on their research. Therefore, we believe that students will have much less opportunity to have beneficial results, and this will affect both universities, societies, and students. And secondly, there is another harm. We believe that China will strike back. Like if you forbid China to fund your universities, China will also forbid your university, United States, for example, American companies to take place in Chinese market. It will be more aggressive, for example, on Hong Kong territory. We believe that this is also a problem, and it also harms. Any question? Okay, no question. We believe that this is also a problem. This will increase attention, and it may even possibly create a snowball effect, because there is already a great amount of tension between China and USA, between Trump and Xi Jinping, and we saw that in trade wars, China always strikes back when USA implements a policy against China's interest. And we believe that, and since Trump is a guy that we cannot control, that striking back may prevent a snowball effect. This may also affect their economical relationships and harm the world economy as a whole, especially in these pandemic days. Or it might also be limited to academics or, for example, US companies, but this is also a harm, since this way US companies will have less effect on China, will have less power in Chinese market, and they will have less relationship with China. Thank you very much.
Thank the speaker for an excellent speech. Now I call upon the Deputy Prime Minister.
Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Okay, so
the first thing that I want to talk about is the question that was brought by closing opposition and by the opening opposition, like how exactly China takes it and how exactly China manipulates with those universities. Notice what Nurlan is talking about. Nurlan already said that there are legal ways in which China can share the shares of the contracts and shares of the patents, and therefore can take it for them also. But secondly, there are also illegal ways in which China may manipulate with those researchers, because we believe that at the point in which China funds those universities, it makes universities more dependent, to some extent more dependent, and therefore incentivizes universities to have more connections with China. At the point in which you have more connections with Chinese government, and there are much more chances of corruption, there are much chances of the fact that you may steal. We may see it happening in the past when we see Harvard chemists like making illegal contracts with China, and therefore giving away researchers for China. This is happening in the status quo, and we believe at the point in which we restrict those connections, at the point in which we ban those funding, we can to the maximum we can restrict the ability of China to steal those technologies. So the second question that was brought by the opening opposition is what it changes, like what is the marginal change that will happen if we restrict China. We believe that Nurlan already proved to you why United States is especially important to develop those technologies, and why not having United States will actually decrease the ability of China to facilitate discrimination. One, Nurlan already talks about best minds, that United States have best students and best facilities. But to notice that United States has the best perspective environment, which means that at the point in which you have Silicon Valley nearby, you have the best tech companies located there, and therefore you're able to facilitate connections with those tech companies, and therefore this is very good for development of your research. But also these areas have like millions and millions of investments cumulatively, which is much more than any other countries. And this is very important, because having such amount of cumulative investments and research money allows you to make the best technologies that are used by China in the status quo. So third thing, like what opening opposition mischaracterizes and are wrong about, they say that it's not about Harvard, it's not about best universities of United States, but rather they claim that it's about like universities that do not have money. Notice that I think that it's not true, because there are like literally no interest, either no interest of United States people and Chinese interest to invest in the universities that have no perspective, because investing in universities that have no money means that there are like much less infrastructure, much less students that are very perspective and ambitious, that can create and have ability to create such technologies. And at the point in which nobody invests in those areas, China also have zero interest to develop just like low-paid universities, which means that in most of the cases, those are the prospective universities that may have those investments in both worlds, because we already said that there is a large endowment culture in the United States, and there are like many private companies, many people that want to invest in those technologies. Apart from China, there are many other countries like European governments that are investing, and we believe that there are many alternatives that we can use, which means that in both worlds, United States will not be harmed by the lack of Chinese investments, because there are many alternatives that we can facilitate. So before I wanted to proceed, POY closing opposition.
Okay, so the main question is, why does US have to protect it, like forbid it itself? Why can't universities themselves choose if they want to accept funding from China or not? Why should it be like a state level thing?
Yeah, because universities want to have this money, because like you always want to have more money, because more money means that you have more ability, and especially when you have easy money at this point, it's happening. We already talked that it's happening in the status quo, and even universities such Harvard are doing it, and we believe that the only option for us to ban it in the state level, in the state level. So let's talk about whether those things are harming or benefiting people. We believe that what opening opposition says is that people are benefiting because now we have, like in China, not 4G but 5G. Notice, even if we take these benefits into account, notice that our harms are far crucial in this debate, because in opening opposition side you have very marginal benefit for those people. Your life changes marginally because your life is probably already good, which means that you already have good internet connection, and your life is will encounter marginal benefit, because in most of those cases those technologies are affordable to rich people but not affordable to poor people, because they're like high tech and because they are new and very important technologies. But on our side of the house, given that Chinese government may afford those technologies, they are harming people, they are killing people by this surveillance, which means that there are much more people having those harms. We believe that this harm is especially important in those countries. But secondly, though, they say that they question the fact that China has much more interest to have the technology that is harmful, but not technology that is useful. We believe the reason why it's true that in most of the cases China has interest in bad technologies is because it's like it's very important for China to have its security, because poverty, China may tackle poverty easily and it's doing it, but the risk is countries like Hong Kong, places like Taiwan, and it's the first interest to tackle it, and therefore in most of the cases those are the people being harmed, but not people being lifted out from poverty. Thank you.
I thank speaker for an excellent speech, and I call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Again. Do you hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Let's start. Firstly, they claim that illegal ways China also uses illegal ways to see the results of the research, and chances of corruption will increase. We believe that even when there is no funding, China can communicate with the mentioned chemists and ask to steal the results of that research. This is not about funding the research. Even if China do not fund any researches and they have intention to do illegal things, they may also try to steal research results they didn't fund in the first place. I don't see any correlation. This is not the same thing as letting China build infrastructures to US like 5G. Secondly, they claim that their marginal impact is that USA have best students' minds, best infrastructures, best ability to facilitate with great tech companies. Look, we need to be really precise. This is my marginal impact. That's why we need to let China fund USA's universities, because we will have the possibility of a great advancement to scientific community. When these opportunities meet with China's money, we will see an opportunity to make advancement in the science. When I say that they don't have any marginal impact, I don't mean these mechanisms. I mean that they say that China kills people, China controls Taiwan, China does discriminating things to Uyghurs. Listen, China is already doing those things. China already has great military powers to control Taiwan, to discriminate against Uyghurs. China doesn't need any bigger technological findings to commit those crimes. Therefore, they have no marginal impact. Their crimes is not relevant to our debating. But to be precisely clear, since USA students are the best minds, since USA infrastructure is the best infrastructure, since USA tech companies is the best companies, if we let China pour money into those possibilities, we can have great results on science. Therefore, this is something great. So after that, they compare their marginal impact with mine, and they say that 5G is far less important because we already have great internet connection. Look, today it is 5G. Tomorrow it may be autonomous vehicles. There are a lot of research. There are a lot of research fields that China has interest. They just assume and construct their case as if China will only fund research fields that have a possibility of being a big technology. I don't agree with that. China can fund research fields on sociology. China can fund research fields on agriculture. China can fund research fields on medicine. And a lot of research results may benefit lots of societies. For example, an agricultural problem that China experiences today may turn out to be a problem in Middle East 10 years later, and researchers will see the results of those researches and will get benefit from those fields, and I believe that this is a huge thing. And lastly, they say that USA will not invest on China's universities. Okay, probably I accept that. Probably USA will not accept. I accept that USA already are not investing in China's universities. Therefore, when they strike back, I don't claim USA will put an embargo on China's universities. But I say that USA will strike back, and USA will somehow strike back. This might be about economics, this might be about international relations, this might be about Hong Kong. For example, when they don't blame China a lot about their build. For example, China is trying to build 5G to England. USA argues against them. Maybe they are going to argue harder. Maybe they are going to implement some new taxes about trade war. I believe that since Trump is a guy that cares about his image and wants to look like a tough guy, and since Xi Jinping is a dictator who had no power to limit his abilities, this can easily create a snowball effect. Like after this is not an unimportant policy. China has interest to fund USA universities, and China will not want to lose that interest. Therefore, they will react back. They will react back. And since we don't have any plausible person running these countries, it is extremely easy that this can create a snowball effect. That's what I'm talking about. That the only answer OG gives to me that China, USA will not bother to put an embargo on China's universities. That's not the point. They can strike back on any field, and this is a huge problem. Why? Because when when USA and Chinese relations get more tension, get more intense, the whole world is being affected. For example, the free market gets affected, and they are less likely to make investments, for example, because this will create world markets, PRI or G.
Yeah, China and USA recently had trade war, literally. They also had expelling of their diplomats as well, but nothing has happened. Why would it be different in that case? Because the cost of conflict is very high.
Yes, yes. Look, trade war tensions are low now. It was very high last year or 2 years ago. I'm saying that they are not going to be infinite. I'm not saying that they are going to be infinitely in a trade war. But even for 3 months or for 2 months, if the tensions get high and the world sees a a possible trade war again, trade war escalating a second or third time. This is going to have huge effects, even in economics on, for example, European countries. I'm very proud to oppose. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for an excellent speech, and I call upon the member of government to continue the case on their side.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep.
Just, can I please note? Am I okay. Okay, 3, 2, 1. During the 1950s in the United States, the USSR led a funding campaign for university professors in order to teach Marxism. If you have been wondering why the hell does the United States, a capitalist country, have such a predominant quantity of university professors who are Marxist leftists, it was because they were on the payroll of the USSR. We in Closing Government today are going to broaden the scope of this debate and explain to you why professors specifically will influence internal politics inside the United States and why this will lead to China making more atrocious actions in the world, etc. But before that, let's outframe this clash about technology by explaining to you why it's non-comparative. If this debate were to be enacted 10 years ago, maybe this would have been impactful. But today, right now, it isn't. A couple of reasons why. First, notice that China currently has the ability and the technology to simply self-develop and manifest its stuff. It's leading in artificial intelligence, robotics, 5G technology. Why? Firstly, it has its area of Shenzhen, which is basically their equivalent of what the Silicon Valley is, where they have a lot of the smart minds of the world. But secondly, notice that they have Huawei that has unique technology which West simply cannot copy. Notice why is this happening? Notice that currently they have incentive to fund this sort of stuff because they're afraid of, for example, that not to be ready for automation, etc. Or they simply just have their own use of this technology. But notice thirdly, and something very crucial in this is something new. This policy, this motion does not change the brain draining process in any way. China can simply go to the United States, offer smart people options to work in Huawei or Shenzhen or whatever. And if they offer enough money to them, they can simply go there. This motion, which is like 100% of where all technology is taken, it's taken from. So we think that that the technology debate is marginal or non-comparative at all. But notice what is comparative, however. China currently has incentive to fund other types of politics, like professors in politics, economics, humanities, professors that influence such research, and for example, may write research for China, etc. Now, framing, why are these people extremely important? Notice that professors are influenced in three specific ways. Firstly, they teach the younger generation internally in their own state, when they have lectures about different topics, when they talk about different things, like for example, economic theories, political theories, etc. Notice secondly, these professors and doctors are usually part of think tanks, of corporations, and are part of government agencies, and they advise and they do things there. But moreover than this, they are part of political parties and they are advisors there. All these people are impactful in these three particular cases for two reasons. First of all, their opinions are something that is important because it's based on empirical truth, or at least the truth that they can persuade. So usually they are very persuasive. They can use specific terms which are smart. They have their own say. But notice secondly, and this is crucial, in the West, the ethos of the Western people is in science. Many of the people's opinions are based on scientific fact, and they have a cognitive bias towards scientific people, their opinions, etc. Meaning that these people have huge leeway when explaining certain theories, etc. Meaning that if China controls these people in these specific sectors, they can control basically a huge part of the society. Now, here's the crucial part, because I don't think opening government can completely explain this. Why China can exert power over these people? Firstly, usually the research funding will happen earlier in the career of these people. So for example, when they're starting their PhD or doctorate, notice that because it's an uphill battle basically to become a professor, money is very scarce, so usually their salary is low, but literally receiving money is something very important to these people. They are poor and they necessarily would feel more comfort when receiving this money. But notice secondly that there is huge competition between research funding. Why? Firstly, research funding is scarce because it's something that is viewed as risky, but also secondly, in the areas of economics, philosophy, political theory, etc., there isn't much funding by normal corporations. Thus, China is taking up this opportunity and giving funding towards these specific people. Now, why is this crucial? It is crucial because basically these future professors are locked out from the ability to opt out of these things. Why? Firstly, it will be a reputational failure. For example, their research goes back, or they fear not having the ability to receive funding from other places long term. Secondly, usually they have teams of people when conducting said research, and they would not like to opt out of this thing because they won't want to leave their teams of people without money. But thirdly, notice that usually there is some sort of general fear that this may not happen in the future. So why is this important? It means that the position of power is in favor of the Chinese instead of the professors. We think that this influences professors on two ways. Firstly, it creates subconscious biases in their specific context. When, for example, because they in the moment they most needed it, the Chinese were there to give them the funding instead of their own. But secondly, notice that they're usually connected with cross-cultural traveling. So, for example, they will go to China, they will go to Shenzhen, to Beijing, they will see the culture there. They'll most likely see the middle class and the richest people there, and their views of what China is may be optimistic, preferable, and they won't see the death camps and all the other things that are happening there. But also notice this is if they're in favor. If, for example, they're not in favor, China can pressure these future professors. How? Firstly, notice that China will necessarily have information about these things. So their wrongdoings, for example, problematic things that they can have, so they can strong arm them in this particular moment. So they have asymmetrical information over them. But notice, secondly, they can also create a bond of like respect and fear in the context of these people if the first mechanism doesn't work. Like explain to them, sorry for no POS, I have a lot of things to say, but explain to them that it is important for the benefit of everyone that this should happen. So there is huge leeway for the Chinese to influence these professors. What happens then? These professors go out and, for example, start researching paper in favor of the Chinese economic system, their political party system, etc. In lectures, they start talking about Chinese economic miracle, the fact that GDP is doing a good job, etc. When political discussions happens, debates happens, they go out and start talking in favor of all these people, in favor of all these things. Notice, because in framing we explained to you that they do have an influence, this will necessarily happen. Why is this impactful? This is crucial framing, and this is the most important thing in this debate. Other than any country in the world, the United States of America is the only static opponent of China. Currently, the only country that no matter what happens says no to them. When the loosening happens, when USA, for example, isn't necessarily reactionary to Chinese actions, China will now not have the risk of the United States attacking them with Trump tariffs, etc., meaning that they're more likely to continue doing and do even more the atrocities that are currently happening, meaning this impacts people that are farmed by China. This is the most important thing in this debate, not only technology. For all these reasons, proud to propose.
I thank the speaker for an excellent speech, and now I call upon the member of opposition.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I would like to touch on two main points in this debate. Firstly, I would like to speak about the ramifications of passing this motion, which is something that has not been brought up by anybody else in this debate. Secondly, I would like to speak more specifically towards the relationship between China and the US. Firstly, the ramifications of passing this motion. If the US were to completely forbid any financial funding of China to United States universities, let's think for a second about how China would take this. Okay, I think something we can all agree is that the political situation in both China and the United States is a little bit of a mess, but something else that we can agree upon is that currently these two nations are headed by two of the most volatile leaders that we have seen to date. President Donald Trump is very unpredictable. He's extremely volatile, and we've seen the same thing from Xi Jinping. How do you think China would react if the United States were to cut off one of their primary sources of diplomatic relationships? And yes, universities are a crucial point of diplomatic relations between the United States and China. How would China react if the United States were to completely cut off this relationship with China? This is not a conflict that either China or the United States can afford. Both countries are deeply entrenched in the other's economics. Many of the United States supply chains go directly through China. The United States could simply not afford such an economic blow if we were to cut off one of our primary sources of diplomatic relationships with China. And I will expand upon this point later, but I would also like to touch upon the point on specifically the relationships between the United States and China. One thing that the government has made the mistake of making is an incredibly reductionist view of this type of relationship. They have said that the Chinese government, by offering funding towards the United States, is somehow going to have a backdoor into United States politics. Well, this is simply not the fact. Looking at United States universities, by the precedent set, they are completely, maybe not completely, but they are significantly autonomous from the United States government and from the Chinese government. United States universities, by definition, need to have their own independent interests. And this is something that the government has failed to take into mind. They said there's no such thing as goodwill. Maybe they are speaking from Chinese point of view. However, they have also brought up that United States universities have many other sources of funding. Perhaps the exception of these sort of financial benefits from China is a gesture of goodwill from the United States, as that ties back to my point earlier. This is a diplomatic tie between the United States and China. However, the government has also brought up many times before that the United States universities will not be harmed by a lack of financial contributions from China. So then that begs the question, why would these universities continue to accept funding? Do they want to be influenced by China? Do they want to be manipulated by China? No, the answer is no. These universities are autonomous. And we only need to look at the political landscape within the United States. We are funded by a conservative president. The majority of our House is conservative. However, the United States universities remained a fundamental liberal aspect of United States politics. Because of this, we can see that they are autonomous from the United States government. And then if they are autonomous from their own government, it only needs to be said that they are also autonomous from a foreign government. These universities, again, do not need the funding from China. There is not a motivation to give China some sort of secret backdoor into our political landscape. There's no need for universities to give China some sort of influence over United States politics. I would also like to speak about, so as I was speaking about earlier, there are going to be certain ramifications if we pass this motion. However, let's look at the status quo. Currently, United States universities do in fact accept research funding from China. In fact, there has already been a precedent set for this. And one thing that the government has failed to touch upon is that there has been significant ties between the United States and China for a very long time, and this has not had a significant influence over United States politics. Some examples off of the top of my head are the New York University, which has campuses in New York, Abu Dhabi, as well as Shanghai. Duke Kunshan University, which is a newly instituted Hello?
Yeah,
Hello?
sorry, I think you were muted for a second, but you're good now.
I'm sorry, where did I leave off?
The NYU campus in Shanghai.
Okay. So we have the NYU campus in Shanghai. We have the Duke campus in Shanghai. We have, even expanding outside of the United States scope, the Chinese government also has connections with Great Britain in terms of, for example, the Xi'an Liverpool University that is stationed in Suzhou. And what have we seen out of these? The Chinese government has not gotten some secret backdoor into US politics through these institutions. In fact, the majority of these graduates have not remained in China. In fact, a lot of I can speak specifically to Duke Kunshan, is that they are completely funded by China. Their funding comes from China. However, the research, they remain an American institution. Their research directly benefits the American government. And more importantly, this university holds autonomy. And the same can be said for NYU Shanghai. Even though they are stationed in China, their campus is in China. China does not have a control over what happens in their campus. They still have a freedom of speech as would be extended to them within the United States. The same can be said for Duke Kunshan University as well as Xi'anjiaotong Liverpool University. Another thing that the government has failed to take into consideration is the fact that diplomatic ties between China and the US are incredibly complex. They are not going to be turned by one the entire United States political system is not going to be overturned by Chinese involvement through universities specifically. For example, the United States and China are currently engaged in a trade war, which has been brought up by the government. However, this trade war has not impacted the relationship between China and the US in terms of specifically university and specifically education. In the United States, a good portion of our university's revenue comes through international students. And many of these students do hail from China. And the same can be said for Chinese universities and American students. As we can see that these relationships are not impacted by simply the relationship between China and the US through universities as a diplomatic tie. Thank you.
Attendant speaker for an excellent speech. And now I call upon the government whip to close the case on their side.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah.
Just give me 1 second to arrange my papers. Dear panel, the world has a China problem. And to be fair, we shouldn't treat this issue very lightly. It is in fact, each step that allows China to continue what it's doing directly impacts people who are suffering currently under this regime. This involves people from Tibetan minorities, Muslim minorities, people who are put in concentration camps, people who are censored and policed to the core of their abilities, China taking more and more territory each day, even now currently from India in the South China Sea, expressing pressure over Taiwan and everything that has been done in Hong Kong and the atrocities and the way that Hong Kong has been currently censored and completely taken over its democracy, violating completely international trust. China is not to be treated lightly. And everything that this CO extension shows is the fact that currently there are people who don't realize that currently, because the West has its own personal incentives, they do not face the direct consequences of letting China continue its authoritarian regime because they don't care enough, because their families are not suffering directly, because they are currently profiting off China's regime. So it makes it even harder for politicians and people who are realizing that the issue to actually go out there and convince people that action should be made, especially in a country with a democratic process such as the US. Meaning that any outside influence, especially as Rumen already showed you, and by the way, no engagement with any of our analysis in terms of CG, and any of the things so far. Rumen has showed you how professors and research funding, especially over time, do have an impact of how things are perceived in society. And it doesn't even matter as to the fact in terms of like, US will now completely love China. It's to the matter of, will US in the next year, 2 years, is going to be able to continue reacting to China? Or are there going to be enough influence for people to say, well, yeah, China is doing all of these bad things, but we shouldn't really interfere because we really care about our supply chain and really want to have more money and cheap products and stuff like that. It really comes down to all of this influence. And China is already winning by censoring each and every company, by censoring even like gaming companies, prevented from talking about Hong Kong products and things like that. This is happening right now, and it has huge impact on all levels of society. So let's firstly engage with closing government. Beyond what is being said, their main idea is already connected to, well, all of this research is going to benefit everybody, which is basically opening opposition's case in terms of that. We have a couple of responses here. First of all, we already explained to you how this technology can be developed in China, so it's very uncomparative, and it also can be developed in other places. It also it's also important to understand that on the comparative, we are fine with losing technological development, especially in the short term, if you're able to take certain pressure towards China and make them less do less of the things that they're doing, or exert political pressure for them to know that we are serious. And if they continue with certain actions, they are going to face more tariffs. They are going to face more retaliation. And this is a very complicated process that needs a lot of political capital. So everything matters, especially in terms of the people who are shaping young people's opinions, who are heavily influential in their exertion of opinions over the general public. So we bite the bullet if that is the case in terms of development. It's also important to understand that this debate is not only about the US. We don't completely care if the US suffers short-term consequences in terms of more tensions, because we believe that this is the only way that things can actually change. Because the US, because of its unique position on the global, the geopolitical scale, does have an over impact of how it actually deals with China, and many of the other actors, such as the European Union, such as countries, for example, with India, are far more likely to retaliate against China if they have the backing of the US in terms of many other
chances.
In terms of like research funding, it's also important to understand that these universities do care. First of all, funding right now is extremely competitive because of three reasons. Firstly, most of the funding goes to already Ivy League universities. Most of the others are completely left off. They don't have that many options. Second of all, rich people who are distributing this money actually have a lot of arbitrary reasons for distributing this money, not only based on competences. Thirdly, society in itself doesn't enough value investing in science compared to sometimes things such as feeling more pressure, such as, for example, certain political or social issues that are happening in the country. I will take opening opposition, please.
There will be lots of other professors who are not funded by China. The ones who are funded by China is not likely to dominate US politics, given politicians will be suspicious of their love for China.
I mean, yeah, you have a very optimistic vision of politicians and how this power is exerted. It doesn't directly mean that like you can just say this person has been bought from China. This person is not likely to just go out there and say, I am with China now, China is the best. He's going to make certain subtle decisions or certain social opinions that are going to overall influence ability. And it's fine for him to say China is not that bad, for people to be convinced that they should care more about their self-interest, which right now is in line with China, which right now doesn't directly impact them because they don't care about Muslim minorities being in that camps. They don't care about people in Hong Kong's democracies being taken away from them, but they are going to care very soon, and we believe that it's going to be even more impactful over time. Now, at the end of this debate, what we're saying is very simple. China has a huge impact on the geopolitical sphere, and is already making a lot of decisions. And political pressure is very volatile, especially because Trump is probably going to go away. So we don't know what are going to be the fields, but also politicians at the end of the day are heavily influenced by the opinions of the general public. Very happy to propose this motion.
I thank the speaker for an excellent speech, and I call upon the opposition whip to close the case for their side and indeed the debate as a whole.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Great. Sure. Is it timer on? Would be written in the chat. Okay, I hope so. Then let's start. Let's start with a couple of rebuttals of the closing government. What closing government tells us is that like we'll stop being like resistant to China in like a lot of ways and stuff, but we don't see why. Because in status quo, US already accepts funding of China, and at the time it's vocally saying that it's like it's for Taiwanese independence. It's vocally saying that it's for Hong Kong independence and stuff, right? And so we don't understand why we cannot continue doing that. Like, because we have to understand that countries are very complex organisms. It's not one person. You can still have, like, say, trade with China and at the same time raise issues that you don't like about China. But like you have to understand that universities, and I hope that we provide on our table a good characterization of universities that all doesn't do, is that universities are very autonomous. Universities are very liberal and very separated from the government and from the politics. And universities are those points in the US and in all the world which continue having that international intellectual sharing. Even when there will be trade war with China, a lot of Chinese professors would still come to us and have like the same research with US professors and stuff, because professors don't fucking care about politics, because like Chinese professors have no idea, like have no say in like say Chinese politics and whatever, right? Because those are just people who want to do their science, and we have to give them opportunity to do it, right? And what we want to explain to you today is that so there was a couple of like logical fallacies in what the government was telling. First, on OG, we're hearing that so universities would be very dependent on China because it's like the only source of money, and then they tell us that there are a lot of other ways to get funding, so we don't see how that all works together. We do agree, by the way, with the point that universities have a lot of choice in where funding comes from, and not only MIT. We don't think that MIT is the only working university in US. We think that a lot of other universities are maybe focused on specific fields of research. Maybe they don't do all science, but they still have very good research, and we cannot deny that, right? Harvard is not the only university in US. And so basically we want to say that they still have a lot of contracts with government, with like Silicon Valley, with whoever, like with private donors and stuff. And they have to have a say in what they want to choose as their funding, right? Especially we want to explain, like I think my punter mentioned it, but I want to reemphasize it, is that a lot of like say US funding comes from military, right? And that gives a lot of problems to US because, for example, it cannot give a lot of money to international students because they're not US residents. So they have a lot of problem funding international students, even if they're just legitimate students in MIT, right? And so they want to have other funding, which is not that restrictive, right? And Chinese are usually very general enough to give funding without any specific rules. And what we want to stress too is that you're still playing by your own rules. You're still in US, you're still playing by US like laws and stuff. You just getting funding from China, which is very unassertive, and we like that. It's even less assertive than like government funded actually. And so that's what also want to explain. Okay, so what we also want to explain is that what happens if you accept it and what happens if you deny it. If you accept it, you still have funding, you have a lot of like science going on. You don't have to like cut off the funding to just employ more checks in the research. Like if you want to go and check more researchers on being like fair and not selling their like technology to China, go for it. Like who like stops you from employing more like checks on professors? That's not an issue. We just want to give universities an opportunity to accept the funding, right? Okay, and so basically what we also want to explain is that first, it's if we don't accept it. But in Asian context, not accepting a goodwill, not accepting a gift is a very, very bad gesture. And it means that politicians in China would be just very, it would be just like basically a first step to a big conflict. Why is it bad? And we're playing today as not as only US, but as a whole world, right? Why is it so bad? Because in context of like coronavirus and economics going down and stuff, like both countries cannot afford themselves to have such a big conflict, right? They want themselves to have a good relationship because they're biggest like global powers in the world. They want to have a good relationship because they're also dragging all other countries inside of that. And like other countries, like currencies are fluctuating, and it causes such a big stress to the country, right? And so that's what also is happening in there. And so just to summarize what happens, if we accept it, everything stays in status quo because we already have the funding. We also don't understand the points of government when they talk about like that China knows professors wrongdoing and stuff. We don't understand what kind of wrongdoing of professors, like they're usual dudes, chill guys. Like we don't understand those very conspirative cases of like when China would like put, it's like when you have funding goes to the university. Professors don't even contact people who send the money, right? It's like they would not have any direct contact with the people who are sending money, so they don't have any direct influence by those people. All they see is just like money they get for research, and they're very happy about it. And so we also want to stress that like the collaboration between Chinese and US would happen even if you forbid the like funding to come in, because like there are so many collaborations happening in mathematics and physics and stuff, right? Like if you want to be more careful about their collaboration in nuclear physics, yes, go for it. But like, why would you forbid it generally for a lot of fields like, I don't know, sociology and psychology and stuff, when it's like so beneficial for all countries? And it's so beneficial for universities because universities are very international communities. They need that international communication because they cannot work solely on their own. And so just to explain what happens to these debaters, we're trying to explain that China is not as bad. And even if China has wrongdoings, like you're talking about those atrocities, US still would vocally be against them and would do some stuff about it. But universities are not connected to all that stuff, right? Chinese universities are not like actually hurting Muslims, right? Chinese universities are just doing their thing. We don't understand why we cannot collaborate with them educationally, right? Because education and politics are very different things, and we have to keep them separate, right? We don't want to mess them up. And so today we pointing out to you that delta on our table is just so much bigger because we get like all the prosperity and research and goodwill, and we have friendly relationships going on. While on the table of government, they are losing funding. They are having like a worse relationship going on with China, and we don't understand why would it be so better for them to resist Chinese funding when it doesn't give you anything politically. So we're very proud to oppose today.
I thank that speaker and indeed everybody for what was an excellent debate. If you want to head out, we're going to come to a call. And best luck with the drill.
Thank you, everyone.